This is JS Programming 2, Module 9, Lecture 1 of 2, and we're going to talk about and identify using the runtime. So I'm your instructor, Robert Hewlett. You can contact me via the email address below. The general learning outcome is to master, know, and understand all content and concepts discussed in lab, lecture, and the assigned readings. Specific learning outcomes, although not an absolute list, discuss the pop-up view workflow, define a pop-up manager, explain a GeoView identify, describe a feature table selection, define the components of a pop-up, distinguish geo elements from each other, discuss the ArcGIS QML runtime callout, describe the ArcGIS QML runtime callout data. So first we're going to talk about pop-ups. So pop-ups. Well, pop-ups are a lot of things. But typically what it is when you're in ArcGIS Online, and I'll start there, and you click on a map or a feature on a map, and you get a little information box pop up about that particular feature. Now, recently in ArcPro, they've added lots of capabilities for you to customize your pop-ups in ArcPro, get them the way you want, test them out, and then publish them in ArcGIS Online, and they'll slide into ArcGIS Online pop-ups. But the concept is that either through ArcPro or through ArcGIS Online yourself, you've gone in and you've customized the pop-up you want for a particular layer. And because that you've already put all that effort in either Pro or in ArcGIS Online, instead of recreating it in code, simply consume the existing pop-up as specified by the user via the layer in the map, and use that to display information. A lot of times it's just reducing the number of fields, or maybe you want to apply a certain formatting because it's currency or it's a certain date format in that. But a pop-up is a lot of things, and we'll get into that now. But I just want to give a little background about what it is, right? So there's this thing called the pop-up viewer, and when you see the word view, it's something typically that the human will see. Okay. There's the pop-up manager. Now the pop-up manager is a class in the background that the user doesn't see on their device, but it manages the changes that you do in the view, eventually gets those changes applied to the feature, right, in memory. And that. So there's a lot of functions about hey, what field are you, or what type of field are you, and to do an update that particular field for that particular feature. There's even a validate method as well, and that. Right? So the pop-up manager is this go-between. It's not a visual element, right? It really sits between the user and the interface and the feature that's being changed, or maybe the feature that you're getting information from. Okay? So the pop-up manager, like I said, is that go-between between the view, what the user is interacting with, and this thing called the geo element. Now this is a new term, geo element, and we'll get into what that is, right? Now it seems to be tied to object ID, that column that ESRI uses as the primary key, so you can uniquely identify, well, which feature are we talking about? Now a feature is a type of geo element, just so you know. Okay. And then there's this thing called the pop-up. So this would be the thing that you say you created or specified in ArcGIS Online or via ArcPro and said, these are the columns I want displayed, and this is the formatting I want on this column, right? It's almost like a definition of how you want, what information you want to be displayed for a particular feature. So there is this initial pop-up definition, right? And so that you got from ArcGIS Online. Right? Now maybe you defined it in ArcPro, but when you published it, it's saved into ArcGIS Online. That would be its initial pop-up definition. Right? And then there's a pop-up definition that you can change. So maybe you want to simplify the pop-up even more on the device. Or maybe the device has some interesting ways of formatting certain data types. And so you can change that on the fly, the initial pop-up definition. Right? A pop-up is typically configured for a geo element. So, technically each feature can have its own individual pop-up if you want it, right? This wouldn't be bad. This this could lead to a thing where on your device you want to have some conditional formatting. So yes, it's a pop-up for a feature and we want a certain value displayed. But let's say we have a threshold, and if that value is low, right, we want to highlight the text in red. And if the value is in a good, not too low or between an acceptable threshold, upper and lower limit, we'll have it green text or something like that. So you do have the ability to actually stylize individual features in terms of their pop-up slightly differently. It gives you a lot of flexibility. Now, because features can have attachments, you don't have to have them, but because they could be there, right, there's also a pop-up attachment, right? So we're going to talk about the workflow for a pop-up view. And this is specified in the runtime, and you can find this in the pop-up view as well in the help documentation. So you typically declare a pop-up view and anchor it. So what does that mean when we say anchor it? Well, it's got to pop up somewhere on the interface, lower left, upper right, close to the feature or offset from the feature, that sort of thing. Maybe you want to anchor it on the right side of the screen and have it slide in via an animation. Right, so you have to decide, okay, where's the pop-up going to be anchored? Where are we going to display it on screen? And then we typically perform an identify operation, right? So we first have to say, okay, where's this pop-up? If we get a hit, right, on an identify, where's this pop-up view going to show up? And then we actually have to do an identify against, I guess, conceptually a map, but it will be applied to a layer within the map. So we're going to perform an identify on this thing called a GeoView, and we'll get into what a GeoView is shortly. But it's a generic thing. It's any type of map view or scene view, right? So we're going to do an identify operation. This usually means that the user is going to click somewhere on your map. You're going to have to grab those pixel coordinates, and then we go to the view and say, hey, is there anything there? Kind of concept, right? So there could be a shortcut here but you declare a pop-up view typically. Where do I want my result to show up? I then need the user to hook into the identify operation on a GeoView. So the user is going to click on the map. I need to grab those pixel coordinates and then perform an identify. So based on where they clicked, you will try to select a feature via the identify result. Now, be careful because when you're working with the objects, there's a singular form and a plural form. Right? There's identify result and identify results. Because a view could have more than one layer. And are we going to drill through all the layers and test each one to see if we get a hit? And what if we get multiple hits? That's identify results. Okay. So if you're going to select a feature from the identify result, it means you would have did an identify on an individual layer. You can also see what features get selected via identify results, plural, but then it drills through all layers in the map, or all operational layers, right? And so there's this layer to table translation. So we have a GeoView, like a map view. It has a map. That map has layers. The user's going to click somewhere. We're going to get that pixel value. We'll use that to identify any of the features that are near that pixel within some sort of tolerance. And then it gets into, well, are we just going to query one layer, or are we going to drill through and query all the layers? Is something you have to realize. And then basically, if we get a hit, right, so that we say, okay, what does that mean? Well, a feature got selected, or a series of features got selected. We need to create a pop-up using that feature, right? Now, a pop-up is not a visual element yet. A pop-up view is, but a pop-up is not. So we're going to create a pop-up based on the feature and that sort of thing. And then eventually, by doing that, we can get the pop-up definition, right? And that's usually from the table, just so you know. And then once we have that, so once we have a feature identified, conceptually selected, we can build the pop-up. And from that pop-up, we can build the pop-up manager, and then we can hook the pop-up view to the pop-up manager. So we can create a pop-up manager from the GeoElements pop-up. But we can't get a GeoElement until we've selected one via the identify. And then we can assign, like I said, the pop-up view's pop-up manager to the pop-up manager we just created, which is based on the feature that we selected or identified. And then we call show on the view, and then it will appear on the screen. And then eventually you want to dismiss the view, or it's going to be there forever, right? That sort of thing. And so usually built into the pop-up view that comes with the runtime is you'll see a little X in the title bar. And when you click on the X, it will dismiss the view. And then the question is, what about attachments? Well, and that will depend whether your feature has attachments, and if the app that you are developing, do you want to handle them viewing or editing attachments? Okay. But if you do have attachments, right, you can create a pop-up attachment manager. Again, this is this coordinating object in the background via the pop-up manager. And then deal with, there's an attachments objects that you can use to manage the attachments after that. So let's talk a little bit about GeoView. So what is it? Well, GeoView is a generic thing. Currently, which means there could be more, there's a map view, 2-dimensional data, scene view, 3-dimensional data. But the idea is that both of these views inherit the identify capabilities from the GeoView. So if you're going to do an identify, it's via the GeoView. Both scene view and map view can handle that because they inherit from GeoView and that. But if you're hunting down how do you do an identify, how are the methods specified, you're not going to find it typically in map view or scene view unless you look at inherited methods. You have to go to GeoView to find how do you do an identify and what is it expecting me to send in. So again, there's other objects as well, pop-ups and others. We'll take a look at those. Right? So just to go over it again. So not pop-up view, not pop-up manager, but a pop-up is two things. It is the pop-up definition. What columns do you want to see on the feature, and how do you want them formatted is one way to look at that. That's what the pop-up definition is. Do you want any preceding text, trailing text around that value as well? Right? And a geo element. Here's a new word, right? Geo element. What's a geo element? Well, one way to look at it, if we're thinking about vectors and feature layers, well, it's an individual feature. But a geo element is a generic object, just like GeoView was. And we're going to get into that shortly about what that means. Okay. There's also the pop-up manager. And then what we do is we can't make a pop-up manager until we have a pop-up, and we can't make a pop-up until we have a geo element. Right? And that sort of thing. Just so you know. Okay. So a pop-up manager, it requires a pop-up and a pop-up attachment manager, but that one's optional because maybe your hosted feature layer doesn't have attachments, or maybe your app doesn't want to deal with attachments, so you don't need to have it. Right? And if you're going to have if your pop-up manager, right, is going to have attachments, then you need to create a pop-up attachment manager, and that's going to be based on a pop-up attachment. There is some notes in the documentation that if the geo element changes, then it seems you have to make a new pop-up manager. So, and so sometimes you have to recreate the pop-up manager, which means you have to get a new pop-up definition geo element and recreate it. Otherwise, the pop-up view will have the old reference to the pop-up manager. So you'll think you're editing feature 42, but the pop-up view thinks you're editing feature 23 or something like that. So let's take a look at geo elements. Again, what is a geo element? It's an abstract thing. Concrete things that inherit geo element are ENC feature. So this is a special type for electronic navigation charts or nautical charts. Their features are sort of like compound features. Right, so many features acting as one. There's the regular feature, which would be like a feature class, a feature layer, hosted feature layer, and ArcGIS Online, and then one feature out of that feature layer. You can also have a graphic, so when you're using graphic overlays, that can also be a geo element. Right? Sometimes graphics are based on a feature. Sometimes you're digitizing in a new feature, so it doesn't exist in the data set yet. So the sort of temporary existence is in this graphic. We learned before that a graphic has some geometry. It has possibly some attributes and definitely some symbology. Could be a KML place mark. This is a very new thing with the 100.4 runtime, right? So this is to deal with the nature of a place mark in KML, which has a slightly different structure than a feature in a hosted feature layer. But all of these things are a type of GeoElement. You can also have a WMS feature. Now, WMS features usually, when they send out the data, is in GML, Geographic Markup Language, close to KML, but it'll have a slightly different structure. And so but a way to abstract that is that, well, I don't know what's coming at me. If it's going to be ANC feature, feature graphic, a KML place mark, or a WMS feature. Those are very specific things, have a very specific format. But the generic thing is called a GeoElement. And this is the thing that supplies the data to a pop-up, right? So maybe the data is technically coming from a nautical chart, navigation chart. Maybe it's coming from a hosted feature layer. Maybe it's just a graphic that someone put in a graphic overlay. Maybe it's coming from a KML file. Maybe it's coming from an OGC web mapping feature service. So again, if we look, this is sort of a stylized UML diagram. GeoElement is the super type. It's abstract, whereas the ones below are very specific. Hard to see in this diagram, but I have italicized GeoElement to enforce the concept in UML land and notation that this is an abstract concept, and that it's these ones down below, ENC feature, feature graphic, KML placemark, and WMS feature, that are specific concrete classes that implement, typically is the word used in code speak, this concept called a GeoElement. So now we're going to talk about the hooks. So what are the hooks? Well, first, to do an identify, you're going to have to tie into the map view to get to the geo view portion of the map view, right? And the signal you need to tie into the map view, because again, a map view is the thing that you're going to see. That's the view. That's the thing that the user interacts with. The thing they tap on, they touch, they click, right? So you're going to hook into mouse on mouse pressed. That's the signal, right? And that helps you capture, well, where did the user click, or where do they touch? And so then you can grab the XY pixel values and then execute the identify layer method on the map view, which is inherited from GeoView. And then typically, because you say identify layer singular, then you have to say, well, which layer do you want to identify? Now, there's also an identify layers with a little s. Really easy to slightly type this wrong when you're a Qt creator. Identify layers will drill through all the operational layers in the map. Here, identify layer will drill through one layer. So you got to tell it which layer you want to identify. You need the X pixel and the Y pixel, which you get from mouse pressed. And then a tolerance. So if you just said the one pixel they click on, they probably get close. And especially if it's a mobile phone, I mean, your finger obscures where you're tapping, right? Which is very frustrating. So you usually put a tolerance around it, and that. I have ran some issues in the code that if I try to go more than 10, it got weird. So it's usually a value through 1 through 10 pixels. I wouldn't go past 10 because it was causing me problems. So how fuzzy of a hit, how much forgiveness are you going to give the user when they tap or click, right? Do you need return pop-ups only? Do you need the geometry coming back, or do you just need the attribute information so that you can display just the info in the pop-up view? Okay. You may not need the geometry because it might already be on your side, so why get it twice, right? If it's an operational layer in a map, then don't ask for the geometry because you actually already have it in the feature table that makes up the feature layer that makes up the layer in the map. So you already have it locally. No need to go get it again. And then you have to tie back in, I guess, to the map view and look for this identify layer status. So you have to hook into a signal identify layer status changed, and when it is good, right, you got to hit. You hit on a feature. Then you can ask for the information. You can then check what's called the identify layer result or identify layer results. It depends if you're doing identify layer versus identify layers, right? In this case, I'm calling identify layer, so check identify layer result to get all the features that got selected for that particular layer that you are identifying. So now what I'm going to do is talk about callouts. So callouts are a part of the map view. So there's actually two components to a callout. There is the callout data and the callout view. And the callout data is part of the map view. So two things, callout. Now this is a view, so typically unique views for a particular runtime end up in the toolkits. So map view is pretty stock, hard to do a runtime without a map. But how you want a callout to look, be shaped, that's might be very different whether it's JavaScript, Qt, Android. And so for some reason they decided to split it. The part the user sees, that's in the toolkit in this case. And then some pretty key methods is to show the callout, and then of course once you're done, dismiss it. Callout data, again, that's definitely a property on the map view in that, whereas callout is a QML type in the toolkit. And it's a core part of the runtime. It can have a geo element, it doesn't need to. It has a property called detail. There's actually a lot of properties on the callout data, but detail is usually the core text that you want to display to the user on the interface. And so that's the text callout. And it's usually that can be whatever you want. Where a pop-up view is more focused on showing information on each column value for a particular feature, we'll say. Callout is usually focusing on one line of text for the whole feature. That's how callouts are typically used. It's very much like the old info window in the Google Maps API. So you wanted to have a little, and typically what happened there is in KML, they would take the description tag and whatever was in there, a big chunk of text, and put it into the info window. So that's sort of where the legacy on this callout thing is to have like that info window pop like in Google Maps. Whereas a pop-up view is more structured, more relational, trying to show you information on each column value for a particular feature. This is a generic blob of text. Now it could be based on pulling values from a bunch of columns, but it's typically a big chunk of text that gets displayed and that you make up. And that's typically stored in detail for a callout data, and then you put that into your callout, and which is the view part that the user is going to see. Now, is this simple? Maybe it's simple, maybe not. But if your idea is say, hey, I want to do like an identify an Arc Pro, and for every column value have it displayed. Okay, the callout's not really geared for that. The pop-up view and pop-up manager are totally aligned to do that and are probably a better choice. Doesn't mean you can't do that in here. It means that you're going to do a little bit more work. You can check out a sample below, and this is from the ArcGIS QML runtime, and it shows you how to do a simple callout. And again, although you can have a geo element, it's not necessary. In the sample, they actually just show you the current real-world coordinates where you tapped as the callout. So what you can do now is pause this video lecture and watch the code walk where we're going to walk through the identify code in QML. If you need to re-examine a topic or need clarification on a term or concept or just have a question, you can get an answer by posting a note on one of the discussion boards for this course. This concludes this lecture.